Kapukubil, good evening. I'm so honoured to be here with you tonight and to speak to you here on Bindal and Wulgarukaba land. I acknowledge Auntie Linda and all the elders past and present, and that sovereignty has never been ceded. You may not know it to look at me, but I'm a little bit older than most of my classmates. Nah, I'm kidding. I know I am. I know you know I am. I had a first-year student the other day call me auntie, and I was like, what? When did that happen? But I do realise that I'm old enough to be their mum. But the point is, it did take me a while to realise what I wanted to be when I grew up. I have quite a long association with JCU, actually. It extends back to the 80s when I attended the JCU daycare while my mum, Annie Myru, some of you may know her, she was a teacher at Shalom Christian College here for a number of years. So I used to go to campus with her while she was studying her Diploma of Education there with JCU. And I loved going to campus. I have fond memories of hanging out in what I thought was a giant rainforest, but it turns out it was just the creek bed there, the Watamuli Creek there near the library. But anyway, I knew from a very young age that I wanted to go to uni and that I wanted to go to JCU in particular. But it would be a little while before that would happen. Once my mum graduated from uni, she took us home to Badu, and so my siblings and I spent our formative years there, swimming, fishing, eating too much mango and wangai, and just getting up to no good. But it was the best years of my life, really. But I also realised while I was there how important it is to have access to health services, especially in Indigenous communities, remote ones. When my mum went into labour, she and my dad had to hop in a little tinny and make the journey from Badu to TI so she could give birth to my little sister in a hospital. And that was in the late 90s, so it wasn't really that long ago. We didn't have a full-time GP presence there at the time. And so I watched my old people with diabetes get foot ulcers, which progressed to them eventually losing toes and limbs. While I was there, I watched my aunties and uncles getting bigger and bigger, and I watched them dying younger and younger. But at the time, that state of health, it seemed normal to me. It was what I saw around me. When it came time for me to go to high school, my parents decided that we should move back to Townsville. I guess they didn't want to send their 4 girls off to boarding school. And there's no high school on Badu, so we had no choice. So there I was, starting grade 8 at St Margaret Mary's College down the road, with my frizzy hair and my really thick island accent, and I didn't speak much English then. So it was a hard adjustment, but I did well at school, and I particularly enjoyed science. I was a bit of a science geek, and I applied for a competition to conduct experiments to get time out of the class to go into the lab. And at the time I was trying to extract eucalyptus oils to test their medicinal purposes. And I suppose in hindsight, I should have made the connection and maybe went into the sciences or health, but instead I applied to JCU and got into a Bachelor of Law, Bachelor of Commerce when I finished high school. And it didn't take long for me to drop the law part, so I focused on commerce and eventually graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in accounting. And I was lucky enough while I was studying to get an Indigenous cadetship with Centrelink. So by the time I graduated in the mid-2000s, I had a job waiting for me in the public service. I was always drawn to the public service because I've always wanted to serve my community and help others, and I thought that the public service was a good way to do this. But I do think that in any vocation, that Indigenous people can make a contribution to mob wherever they are, whatever they're doing. After about a year at Centrelink, I started applying for jobs in Canberra because I realised that if I wanted to progress in the public service, that I needed to go to Canberra where the machinery of government was and where I'd be able to climb the ladder and hopefully make a difference. So I eventually got into the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT. For those of you who don't know, they're the department that sends their staff overseas on diplomatic postings to embassies around the world. My first posting, however, was to Thursday Island. Yeah, we have a small 2-person post there. So it was a short-term visit, but I was able, while I was there, to get back to Badu. I hitched a ride on a chopper. They were collecting someone who was sick. And it was the first time that I'd been back there in about 15 years. And so much had changed since I'd been there. There were roads, there were new houses, there were deadly shops. But the thing that shocked me was that health had gone the other way. People were in poorer health, and so I started asking why. I started looking a bit deeper into the government reports on health that were coming across my desk, and I started paying attention to the Closing the Gap updates that I was getting as well to try and understand what was going on. I ended up staying with DFAT for almost 10 years, and I did get to do a couple of overseas postings. The first was to Myanmar. It was then called Burma, and at the time it was under military rule and closed to external countries. Nobody could get in. And one of the cool things I got to do while I was there was help manage a GP clinic. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever socialised with doctors. And I thought, you know what? They can be a doctor, maybe I can too. That sort of planted the first seeds for me. I later did a posting to Nauru in the Pacific. It's famous for our bird poo and our little offshore detention centre. And it was there, sometime in 2016, that I first learned about a lady called Miss Do. Miss Do was a 22-year-old Aboriginal woman who one day called the cops for help because she had a domestic with her partner. When they arrived, they realised that she had unpaid fines, and they arrested not only her partner, but her as well. They took her to lockup, and she died in police custody 3 days later. I initially thought that the police were to blame. It seemed obvious. But interestingly, when I looked into it, it was doctors that failed to save Miss Do's life. She went to the hospital 3 times, and 3 times medical staff failed to do something as basic as take vital signs. They should have realised that Miss Do wasn't a druggie who was coming down from drugs or faking it like the cops told them. They should have realised that she had sepsis, which is treatable if found early enough. But Miss Do didn't get that chance. And I was angered to the point that I felt compelled to do something. And it was then that I decided to change careers. I packed up my family, I came home, I applied to JCU to do the Diploma of Higher Education because I needed it to do the prerequisites to get into medicine. And here I am, second-year medical student now. I have to say that studying at JCU this time around is a little bit different. And I have a family now, so that has its own challenges. And I can't pull the all-nighters that I used to be able to, so my study habits have changed a bit. But, you know, some things on campus have changed as well. We have phenomenal supports there now. I mean, back in the day, the library was just that. It was a building with books. Now you can go there for help with referencing, research, and even get people to help you write your assignments, give you advice on that. The Indigenous Centre has moved and revamped, and it's a wonderful thing, I think. And there are a lot more blackfellas studying now, which I think is really, really great. Because I've always thought that to be Indigenous is to be an educated and a worldly person. Our ancestors, they always sought knowledge and shared knowledge, and they went so far as to learn the languages of the people around them and the people who visited them from afar in order to achieve that end. That's our way, and it's always been our way. But unfortunately, over the last 200 years, there's been a new way. It's something that I call crab mentality, and some of you might know it as tall poppy syndrome. It's sad, but it's true that sometimes our biggest barriers are our community, are our mob. But it's not surprising, really, when you think about it. Our parents' and our grandparents' experience of education was very different to ours. It was education that was forced on them at the expense of their traditional and ancient knowledge, which to this day is still devalued and ignored, I think, to the disadvantage of all Australians. But don't blame mob though, because I think this comes from fear and not knowing. But we don't have to fear, because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Some of them are in the room with us here tonight. Giants who fought to remove the legislative and structural impediments to our participation, not only in society but in education. Giants who were the firsts and who broke through the ceilings to make it possible for us to go through them as well. So don't listen to anyone who might call you a coconut or tell you to hand your black card in because you're going to uni. Because getting an education is not about giving up your blackness. It's about strengthening your indigeneity. Culture isn't static. It's here, it's now, it's dynamic, it's evolving. For over 100,000 years at least, our cultures have been evolving. For the last 200 years, we've been told that our culture's stuck in the past and that to be Indigenous means to look back. I want to encourage all of you here tonight to look forward and remember that when just one of us rises up, we all rise up because we take our mob, we take our families, we take our communities with us. I think the time has come for us to share our Indigenous ways of being, thinking and doing, because I believe therein lies the answers to many of today's and tomorrow's problems. So study hard, you mob. There's never been a better time, in our recent history anyway, to pursue your dreams, no matter how lofty they seem. And please don't ever tell yourself that it's too late, like Auntie Linda said. Because if this old auntie here can do it, you definitely can. Thank you.